are back right here tomorrow at noon Eastern. But now, here's Harris Faulkner.
Let's begin with what's developing this hour. New questions for James Comey ahead of a bombshell Inspector General's report. We'll go outnumbered overtime now. I'm Harris Faulkner. The Justice Department's internal watchdog has reportedly concluded former FBI Director James Comey defied authority at times during the Hillary Clinton email investigation. What does that mean? It is according to ABC News, which says the draft report explicitly uses the word insubordinate to describe James Comey's behavior. All this is fired Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe is seeking immunity from the Senate Judiciary Committee in order to testify on that Inspector General's report. We'll hear from a member of House Judiciary Committee, Congressman Matt Gaetz, in just a moment. First, I want to get all the news that's been happening in the last hour or so. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge breaks it all down. Catherine?
Well, thank you, Harris. Fox News is working to independently confirm that report that the Inspector General did find evidence that former FBI Director James Comey was found to be insubordinate and went outside the chain of command. Based on our ongoing reporting, we understand one of the primary episodes the Inspector General was investigating was his decision in July of 2016. You see the event here, or you did just a moment ago, to publicly announce the findings of the FBI investigation that used the code acronym MYE, or mid-year exam, and that he was recommending against criminal charges. That's the key development there, because typically that decision would be under the purview of the Attorney General Loretta Lynch, but that was a responsibility that Director Comey took upon himself. Also, in a separate development, Fox News has obtained these congressional letters that show the former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, who worked directly for James Comey, wants a special status if he testifies before the Senate Judiciary Committee later this month about that same Inspector General's report. This special status is called use immunity, and under those conditions, McCabe's testimony cannot be used against him in a criminal prosecution. That matters because the Inspector General found that McCabe lied under oath, and there was a criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney here in Washington, D.C. for potential violations of 18 U.S.C. 1001. That's lying to federal investigators. This morning, a senior Senate Republican who sits on the Judiciary Committee recommended against a deal to secure McCabe's testimony.
We really need to get to the bottom of what happened at the FBI during the Comey years, where apparently there was misconduct going on, which I think has really impugned the reputation of the finest law enforcement agency in the world. And we need to clear the air. And so I think giving Mr. McCabe cover through immunity would be a mistake.
McCabe's lawyer said in a quote, McCabe is willing to testify, but because of the criminal referral, he must be afforded suitable legal protection, adding that if he were unable to get such a deal, McCabe will have no choice but to invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. Based on the timing, this continues to be a very fluid situation. As you know, Harris, there is a date on the calendar for Monday next week for open public testimony in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's the lead committee for the Inspector General's report. But based on what we've learned in the last 24 hours, it does appear that that date is likely to slip yet again, Harris.
Well, and we've seen some delays, Catherine, and lawmakers that I've been talking with have said, you know, they want a chance for that report to come out, obviously, before they would hold that hearing. So they'll just have to wait until that happens.
If I can just add one thing.
Sure.
Based on what we know, it's a very lengthy report, somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 pages. And people who sit on the Senate Judiciary Committee feel they need at least a couple of days to adequately comb through the report so they can ask the right questions for the Inspector General Horowitz, and he can appropriately defend his findings, Harris.
Sure. Interesting.
Yeah.
500 pages, depending on how much of it leaks. Because right now we're looking at the leaks.
And just if I could say one other thing on that, I think that's pretty significant because we're in a phase right now where the principals who cooperated are allowed to review the findings and then make their case or their best argument against what the conclusions are. I think one of the key things is that we haven't had a lot of leaks about the findings, and the parties who would have that information may feel that it's pretty damaging, and they're trying to, you know, shape the outcome to the extent they can with their version of what happened.
It's very interesting. I'm going to bring it up with my first guest, Catherine Great
You're
reporting.
welcome.
Thank you. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida sits on the House Judiciary Committee. Boy, this story has come together quickly. And Catherine Herridge and I, you may have heard, we're just talking about the leaks that helped bring this about. Let's start with the word insubordinate that apparently that we've learned about James Comey through these leaks. Insubordinate from that Inspector General's report. What do you make of it?
Well, I am eager to discuss that, Harris, but first, if you'll afford me a privilege, I am the son of a military brat, and in my district, we have more members of the active duty military than any other congressional district in America, and your new book will ring true in their lives, and I just wanted to thank you for it, how military brats can meet challenges and adversity with grit and determination. It really is going to be special for my family and for so many families in my district. As it relates to Mr. Comey, obviously we've seen circumstances where he's exceeded his authority. We also can't make sense of his public testimony that he had not made a decision on the Hillary Clinton investigation until after conducting the key elements of that investigation. Later, we find out that drafts of his exoneration statement were done earlier. But look, if Washington, D.C. was the swamp, Andrew McCabe might be the Loch Ness monster of the swamp. And when we look at what he's doing now, I mean, Andrew McCabe is literally asking for immunity before testifying under oath so that he's not prosecuted for lies that he told previously while testifying under oath. I think it would be outrageous for us to grant any type of use of immunity to Mr. McCabe. I think he needs to account for his actions, and I don't think that he's out of the woods yet as far as a criminal prosecution.
Well, first of all, thank you for the comments on the military brats on my book. I'm very grateful. I do want to talk, though, about this idea, and I wrote it down. You said McCabe might be the Loch Ness monster of the swamp. Why do you think it is he would try to put himself in a position where he could talk without immunity if he had planned to tell I mean, has he been dishonest? Is there a reason why he'd be seeking it?
Well, Andrew McCabe is a proud guy. That doesn't make him an honest guy. I was in the room when he gave testimony behind closed doors to the House Judiciary Committee, and I could tell you my reaction to that was that this is someone who wasn't purely engaged in the investigative work of the FBI. He was trying to shape public opinion. Remember, Harris, what the substance of the lies were about. He was leaking to the Wall Street Journal about the nature of the Hillary Clinton investigation, wanting to shape public opinion. And so Andrew McCabe may want to testify to, again, try to shape public opinion, but we should not give him immunity because, my goodness, this was the very person who sent the email taking the jurisdiction away from the Washington, D.C. field office and bringing it to the rest of the swamp creatures and deep state folks at the headquarters of the FBI. I think we ought to stand with the frontline FBI folks and empower them, not empower the bureaucrats that want to shape public opinion through leaks.
You know, you talk about Andrew McCabe as the guy who might have some answers, though, because remember when James Comey first came out on his book tour, we learned from McCabe that they maybe weren't in agreement about what really happened with going to the media and leaking things per McCabe, that he said his boss knew all about that. So are you missing an opportunity by not offering him that special status of immunity to have him turn on his boss potentially with some information that you might need?
Well, I don't want to make the same mistakes the Obama Justice Department made. Remember, the Obama Justice Department gave these broad immunity deals to Cheryl Mills and Heather Samuelson, those folks who were key Hillary Clinton allies. So we want to get away from that environment so that we can truly hold people accountable. We're going to have to get to the emails, and I want to specifically know who told Andrew McCabe to send the email telling the Washington, D.C. field office to stop working on the Hillary Clinton investigation. Was that James Comey? Was it Andrew McCabe himself? Did it have something to do with his wife's campaign for political office? So we do still need answers, but we shouldn't be trading immunity to get those answers. That was the mistake of the Obama Justice Department.
Look, Congressman, I know it's across chambers, but we are waiting to see what's going to happen with that Senate Judicial Committee hearing. And just to give you a last word on this, this is getting pushed back yet again. That Inspector General's report, I know it's leaking. Will you get an opportunity to see that before everybody else?
I share the president's concern that the actual substance of the report has likely been written for some time. Now, you may have people trying to sand off the rough edges and make it look like the conduct was more acceptable than it should have been. So the president expressed that concern in his tweet yesterday. Based on some of my own sources, I share that concern, and that's why we're pushing to get the information out in the public as soon as possible. And if people are behind the scenes changing the substance of that report, we will find them. Remember, we caught the folks who changed the Hillary Clinton exoneration statement. And if there are folks that are engaged in that improper behavior, we'll catch them again.
Congressman Matt Gaetz, the great state of Florida, thank you very much. And again, thank you for your kind words about my new book. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Harris.
So for more on the many legal angles here, let's bring in Fred Teesey, former federal prosecutor and former assistant U.S. Attorney General in the criminal division. My first question for you with regard to all of this, is insubordinate a legal term?
It depends on how he was insubordinate. I mean, I think if I understand your question...
Well, he was the head of the FBI, so...
Right. So if his insubordination was that he broke the law and leaked things that he shouldn't have or did things that he shouldn't have, then the answer is yes, it's a legal term. It's a euphemism for he broke the law, in my opinion.
All right. I'm watching out of the corner of my eye, and we may pop this up on the screen, too. We've been waiting for a White House press briefing by Larry Kudlow, and when that happens, talking about the economics of the G7 summit, we'll go to that live. So let me just get that in there real quickly.
Problem.
So,
yep.
You know, Fred, when you look at all of the Inspector General's report, and we haven't seen it yet, just stuff is coming out and leaking, what are you as a legal professional looking for?
Well, I'm looking for a lot of things. I mean, as a federal prosecutor, one of the things you don't want to do is give immunity if you can avoid it, because it really hurts you. I mean, I had a case involving 2 FAA officials and an entire airline, and we had to give immunity. But you don't want to give immunity until you know what's going on. So the answer to your question is, what I'm looking for from the IG's report is, what are the facts? What are the information? I need to, any type of prosecutor needs to make a reasoned decision. Because you know what, Harris? What's the end game? In my opinion, the end game should be to make sure that people stand accountable and are prosecuted to the full extent of the law if they broke the law.
And how complicated is it for that accountability? Because we don't see it a lot in our federal government. So you see the chasing of the facts right now. The Inspector General seems to be able to multitask. He's also looking at the Hillary Clinton investigation, so on and so forth.
Right, and so you know what, Harris? I mean, part of my frustration over years is it seems to me, and I think it seems to a lot of outside observers, that maybe the law's not getting followed, and that needs to end. I mean, the public has to have confidence in the DOJ and the FBI. When I was a federal prosecutor, you know, the proudest day of my life was when I put my hand on the Bible and became a prosecutor, and my job was to uphold the law, irrespective of my political convictions. And the FBI that I worked with, I never saw any of this stuff, kind of these allegations that you're seeing. So the end game takes on a couple of things. In the prosecution, people need to be held accountable for what they did, not from a political standpoint. There's no room for politics in any of this on either side. There's the law, and there's the conduct of the people that engage in activity that may have broken the law, and there's justice to be answered to. Those are what count.
Fred, does what we are learning, and again, this is drip, because it's being leaked out of the IG's report. So we're going to have to wait another few days, potentially even next week, before we know all of it. We may never know all of it, but we're hoping to know all of it. So my question to you now is, with this Inspector General's report, do we wipe away the thought of a second special counsel to look into things like how the Hillary Clinton investigation into that private server when she was Secretary of State, how that came about, if there were any laws broken? I mean, does this answer back? Is this IG doing a good enough job or a deep enough job just from what we've seen on the surface?
You know, this IG has a tremendous reputation. So far, the reports that I've seen from him are fair and balanced, to coin a term. You know, the question is, what are the facts? And as you say, we don't have all the facts. We only have half the facts. And the surefire way to get in trouble is to go forward with half the facts. We've already seen that in one Inspector General's report, one special prosecutor's appointment. I am personally loath to see special prosecutors get appointed, but, you know, at some point, we've got to return the confidence in the public and the transparency in these institutions. And if getting a special prosecutor, one who's above reproach, to come in and do the right job and do that and make sure that people are held accountable for what happened, that would go a long way to saving the reputation, such as it is, of the DOJ and the FBI at this point.
All right. Ahead of that report, again, we are looking at leaks. How much does that complicate? Because sometimes it can start a narrative about a certain situation. As an attorney, I know you don't like to see things leak, but when you look at this, what does it really do to the evidence in a case? And I call it a case because that's what we're looking at.
Right, we are looking at a case, and it compromises your ability to prosecute a case. I mean, again, these leaks are driven by people with political ambitions. That's the only reason to leak things. I mean, the federal grand jury rules require secrecy. Now, now put aside whether or not we're talking about indictments or anything like that. Rule 6E of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure make it very, very clear. You're not to leak anything. And I will tell you, and every person in law enforcement will tell you, that leaks don't help the investigation in any way, shape, or form. They tip off people to the way the prosecutors and the investigators may be going. They do a lot of really bad things. That's why, by the way, it's against the law to leak this stuff. And so it troubles me when I see it.
Fred TC, we appreciate your perspective and legal counsel, if you will, on this. Thank you very much.
Harris, thank you very much for having me. Have a great day.
President Trump is celebrating last night's Super Tuesday primaries, especially John Cox's win, the candidate he endorsed for California governor. What does it mean for the November midterm elections? We'll break it down. Stay close.
If John Cox just simply ran on repealing the gasoline tax, which the initiative's on the ballot, would he help put on? I want to see how the Democrats defend that when they even got recalled over it.
Is going to set up a clear choice between Venezuela, which is what Gavin Newsom wants California to look like, and the California dream restored, which is what I'm aiming to do. This state is wonderful, and we've got to change the regime in Sacramento, get the special interests out of power, and return this state to the great golden state it is.
That was Republican John Cox, a President Trump-backed candidate who secured a spot in California's race for governor. Primary voters went to the polls there and in 7 other states last night in what's considered this year's mini Super Tuesday. President Trump tweeted this: "Great night for Republicans. Congratulations to John Cox on a really big number in California. He can win." Even fake news CNN said the Trump impact was really big, much bigger than they ever thought possible. So much for the big blue wave. It may be a big red wave. Working hard! Exclamation point. Cox will now go up against Democrat Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom in November. Peter Ducey, live from Del Mar, California, with more. Peter?
Harris, the argument Republican candidate for governor John Cox started making just a few minutes after he found out he had a spot on the ballot last night was pretty similar to the argument that another long shot Republican made 2 years ago. Cox said, "We put a businessman in the White House, let's put one in the governor's mansion." Now, the Trump-endorsed John Cox has already received congratulations from President Trump on Twitter, and that also got the attention of first-place finisher in the gubernatorial primary, Gavin Newsom. The Democrat tweeted back to the president this: "Please come campaign for him as much as possible." The Senate primary here, though, didn't produce any Republican choices for November. State Senator Kevin De Leon, a progressive Democrat, got the second spot on the ballot with longtime incumbent Democrat Dianne Feinstein, whereas the most hotly contested House primaries in Orange County are all going to have a Republican and a Democratic candidate. The 48th district there stoked fears among Democrats that they could only finish third place at best, which would mean no November under California's jungle primary system, but it didn't happen. Now the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, or DCCC, says, quote, "The DCCC's data-driven investments to California will continue to pay dividends in November and beyond, and Republicans once again mismanaged their investments and missed the opportunity to have a real impact." But in Orange County districts where a Republican incumbent was defending, they still got more votes than Democratic challengers. And in open seats that are being vacated by retiring Republican members, Republican hopefuls got more votes than Democrats as well. However, because nobody got locked out of any of the races in the state, none of these districts come off the board for Democrats in their quest to take back the House in November. Harris.
It's interesting. I talked with GOP Congresswoman Mimi Walter yesterday, and she was talking about Orange County, and I made the comment, well, it is more conservative, but as you're saying, that sort of jungle primary wasn't enough to keep Democrats shut out. Peter Ducey, thank you very much. Let's talk about the politics, though, of Republicans beating Democrats in the state of California. You don't often hear about that. Republican Congressman Darrell Issa of California, 16 candidates battled it out for the seat he's vacating right now. and it appears a Democrat and Republican will move on to the general election. So let's just start with that seat, and then we'll talk more broadly about how you beat them in that state. Good to see you, by the way.
Well, good to be on. And, you know, in the seat that I've been honored to hold for almost 18 years, Diane Harkey received, almost a third of the vote. The highest ranking Democrat got about 11%. Republicans got the majority of the votes, while Democrats got a minority. I think that bodes well for the fall, that in fact, with amazing amounts of millions of dollars, Sarah Jacobs, the granddaughter of Qualcomm founder, spent countless millions of her trust money and wasn't even able to get to the top of the Democratic side. Now, having said that, a lot of money is going to be at stake. Nancy Pelosi is betting her return to being the Speaker on being able to flip these seats in California. And I know you haven't asked, but John Cox, who's a constituent of mine, lives in my district, I endorsed. He's going to make a real difference because he's going to be campaigning statewide, getting Republicans to have a reason to come out and vote on a statewide basis, and that's going to help all of our candidates.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about the chances, because off the top I said you don't normally talk about GOP beating Democrat in California, but are things changing, and if they are, why?
Well, I think the gas tax is kind of one of those last straw things. The Democrats didn't see a problem increasing taxes by essentially $1. We're about $1 more expensive than in Virginia. It's quite a shock to go back and forth to fill up two identical cars on two coasts and have the price tag for filling them up be so different for me every week. But the reality is, their quest for cap and trade on a state basis, something that made no sense, absolutely has become a recall type event. And John Cox was early on supporting it, helping to fund it, and betting that, in fact, middle class people, working people, people who might otherwise vote Democrat, realize that their state's gone too far.
Can I ask you, too, are sanctuary cities or sanctuary language, illegal immigration, is that part of the conversation, too? Because that's come from President Trump. And now you're talking about whether he can bring all of that into the state of California and help these Republican candidates win.
Well, I think the law enforcement aspect of sanctuary state has really been driving voters to change, but it's still in its infancy. If you ask people generically, should we deal with undocumented workers in a way in which we solve the problem and many of them stay, majority of Californians would say yes. If you ask about releasing criminals back onto the streets when they could be deported, it flips. And it flips so much so that places like Oakland, San Diego, and Orange County, but lots of places that you'd normally consider to be Democrat strongholds, law enforcement and the people are coming out objecting to it. So it will be an issue. It's an issue on at the governor's level because Governor Cox would change that. But it's also a national issue because city after city, county after county have used their authority to push back on this law and decide with the federal government. Both of my counties strongly support pushing back on this, along with most of the cities in my district. And that really says something, which is there is a bridge too far, and it's putting criminals back on the street, something that Gavin Newsom on a statewide basis and the likely Democrat in my district, because all of them supported it, are going to be on the wrong side of.
I'm going to say, after making that argument the way you did, that you might get a few calls to help some of these people out on the campaign trail. I mean, I know you are retiring officially, but you never know. Congressman Issa, great to see you. Thank you. The White House is supporting Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's move to cancel most of the Senate's August recess, saying there's important work that needs to get done. But Democrats are calling it a political calculation ahead of the midterm elections. Former House Speaker Newt Gingrich will weigh in on how that could...
I've canceled the August recess. We have a lot of important work to do as a result of unprecedented obstruction. I hope we'll get greater cooperation, but everybody should anticipate that we will be here as I announced today.
Well, that was Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell announcing his decision to cancel most of the Senate's August recess, saying Democrats have been standing in the way of important work that needs to be done. President Trump is applauding the move, but Democrats are saying they are against it. It's meant to keep Democrats off the campaign trail months before the midterm elections, they argue. Florida Senator Bill Nelson is among those up for re-election in November. Watch.
It's a calculation of raw politics on the part of Mitch McConnell. He thinks by keeping us here because we have to vote, that's what we're elected to do, and which I will do, he thinks that's going to make a difference on elections where there are Democratic incumbents. But at the end of the day, he's mistaken.
And there's more to the story. Let's get it from Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel, who's obviously live on the Hill. Mike?
Harris, good afternoon to you. Today, the Senate Republican whip fired back, noting a number of his GOP colleagues are also up for re-election.
This is going to affect both parties, so believe me, I think other than perhaps us here inside the Beltway, folks back home really could give a flip.
The Senate Majority Leader made the announcement about August recess yesterday. Mitch McConnell blasted Democrats for obstruction, and earlier today he talked about what he would like to get done.
We need to confirm more of the president's team and judicial nominees. We need to take up regular appropriation bills. We need to tackle legislative priorities like the water infrastructure bill, the farm bill, the defense bill, and many others. So the Senate will remain in session in August.
Moments later, the Senate Democratic leader spoke and laid out a totally different priority for the dog days of summer, an issue which Democrats clearly believe will resonate with voters in this midterm election year.
The number one thing Americans want is health care, and we Democrats will spend August recess focusing on that issue and forcing our Republicans to either cast votes or deny votes on those important issues. It's a great opportunity, not just for Democrats, not just for Republicans, but for America. We're going to do it.
It is setting up to be a very hot and long summer here on Capitol Hill. Harris?
I love summer. The hotter, the better. Good to see you, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you.
So who's to blame for senators having to stay in our nation's capital and do their jobs in the August heat? And could this really be part of a GOP strategy to keep Dems off the campaign trail? Joining me now is a man who actually has done this before, ordered August recess and other recesses canceled. Back from Outnumbered, the author of the new book, Trump's America, The Truth About Our Nation's Great Comeback. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, is here. So you've done this sort of thing before. You extend things. What's this really about in your estimation?
Well, the Democrats have had a relentless strategy of blocking presidential nominations, whether to ambassadorships, to major government jobs, crippling the ability to fill in these slots. And McConnell has been, I think, more than patient in trying to work this out. I'm delighted he's doing this. And I think that the Democrats are faced with a choice. If you want to continue to be totally obstructionist, you're going to be here all of August. If you want to get things done, I mean, there are dozens of secondary jobs they could approve on unanimous consent in 2 hours.
So some of these wouldn't even really be contentious, is what you're telling me.
Normally, 90% of these would not be contentious, except with Schumer and the Democrats under Trump. Everything is contentious.
Speaker, is this some of the reason why when I talk to House members and they say, well, we put stuff out like 500 bills, that those things are sitting there, or is there some other reason?
Well, first of all, the Senate's just very hard to operate. It's designed to be hard to operate, and it succeeds. So it's always harder to get things through the Senate than through the House. But in addition, as McConnell has legitimately pointed out, the Senate's in the personnel business. I mean, the House doesn't have to approve ambassadors. The House doesn't approve cabinet secretaries and assistant secretaries. We just were together earlier on Outnumbered watching a signing ceremony.
Right.
There is a nominee to be the head of the VA who is currently still sitting
Mr.
in
Wilkie.
the Senate.
Yes.
And he's sitting, well, he ought to be out of there. They ought to approve him, get him to his job.
Well, and the president alluded to as much. He thanked the acting secretary of the VA, who was also Mr. O'Rourke, who was also in the audience. But he said, you know, my guy that I've chosen as a nominee is also here today, too. Would be kind of good to kind of get him going. So what happens? What is the calculation of raw politics that we've heard some Democrats say? What happens when you don't let an administration staff up?
Well, you turn power. I mean, if you're a Democrat, you love it because the professional full-time
unless it's happening to you.
Yeah, I mean, well, plus the professional full-time bureaucracy tends to be liberal Democrats. So if you don't have a Trump person in there running a department, the department's being run by a temporary person who very often doesn't share Trump's values, didn't vote for Trump, and doesn't want to implement Trump's program.
But there are plenty of people in the administration who love what they do and don't let politics get in the mix, right?
But the president has the right to appoint a set of people. Plus, when you start talking about foreign policy, there are career diplomats who are blocked by the Senate.
Yeah, it's complicated right now, too, because we're operating on so many different fronts. I mean, you've got North Korea coming up, and even Democrats are saying they sent that letter to the president this week. They totally believe it's going to happen, so here are their demands, if you will. So they know we need to have people in place.
But here's a good example. The president just named the immediate past head of the Pacific Command, a 4-star admiral, to be our ambassador to Korea, to South Korea. That should go through in a week. I mean, here's a guy who's totally vetted. We all know he has cleared every security procedure. He knows what he's doing. He would be a great ambassador. Given the dangers of what's going on, they should fast-track that instantly.
Wow. Real quickly, you said that, because we talked off camera, that you have put into play something that looks like this August recess, where they're going to go back home for potentially that first week of August and then be brought back.
Yeah.
What gets accomplished, really?
Well, in this case, if he brings them back and he's serious about it, they're going to get a lot of people approved who would not normally be approved.
Right before the midterm. So nobody really wants to be standing in the way, I would imagine.
Well, I think it's very tricky for the Democrats to complain too much because it's a traffic jam they created. So it's hard to go home and complain that you're actually being asked to do your job.
Speaker, thank you.
Good
Great
to see
have you here. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders defending her credibility and accusing reporters of being more interested in attacking the president than reporting the news. Does she have a point? A former press secretary for House Republican Whip Roy Blunt joins me after the break. Stay close.
Frankly, I think my credibility is probably higher than the media's. I think that if you spent a little bit more time reporting the news instead of trying to tear me down, you might actually see that we're working hard trying to provide you good information and trying to provide that same good information to the American people.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders firing back at reporters who were going after her about a previous statement she'd made related to the Russia investigation, which turned out to be inaccurate. Meanwhile, President Trump's re-election campaign has launched a new website aimed at, quote, countering the errors of the mainstream media. Here to weigh in on all of this, Amos Snead, a former press secretary for House Republican Whip Roy Blunt and a founding partner of S3 Public Affairs, a person who I go to often when things get contentious in that press briefing room. And I like to ask you, some of this is par for the course. I mean, you've seen it across administrations. How is this particularly different from what you've seen?
Harris, I'll tell you this. I've worked in political communications in Washington, D.C. for about 15 years, and I will say that the White House press secretary spot, that role, is one of the hardest, if not the most difficult positions to have in Washington. And I'll say this about what Sarah's doing right now. I think she's doing an incredible job in an impossible situation. I think a lot of this has turned to be about her, and it should be about the administration. And instead, we've seen a lot of personal attacks on her recently.
Why do you think that is?
I think, let's think about it.
From what you've seen.
From what I've seen, I think, the media's job is to hold the government accountable, hold people in positions of power accountable. Sarah Huckabee Sanders' job is to protect the administration, to defend the administration in front of the media. What we've seen happen is this has gotten so partisan, so hyper-partisan. These have turned into attacks, not on the administration, but also on Sarah herself.
I remember a conversation I had very early in the Obama administration with his former press secretary, Robert Gibbs. Really, really nice guy, very talented at what he did. And I said, you're leaving after a period of time. And he said, this is tough because I am defending my boss and everybody else wants to know what about my boss they can go after, which is exactly what you said. So this isn't necessarily politically different. But it has gotten nasty. I mean, they go after her as a person.
Now, let's remember, the media invited Sarah Huckabee Sanders to sit on the dais at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
I was there.
Sit there, and they brought a comedian in that they selected, and who just attacked her personally, attacked her about her appearance, and she sat there with grace, and she continued smiling. Who could do that? How could you sit there in front of not only your colleagues, a room full of 1,000 people, but millions of people watching at home, and then come back the next day and say, I'm going to do my job.
So just to be clear, because you and I have talked about all sorts of First Amendment issues as well, this is not on that comedian and what she can and cannot say. You're talking about how the job has morphed at the very tippy top of communications at the White House. So how does that actually either damage or inform, change what we hear? And, you know, Newt Gingrich, former House Speaker, said, why are we even doing them anymore?
That's a real, I mean, I think if you look at this, all of media has changed, right? It used to be you gave one statement from the White House, the next day you'd read it in the paper in the morning. I mean, we have 3 or 4 news cycles that'll happen between now and the end of business today. So you're always on. You're on 24/7, 365 days a year. And they're looking for any opening, any inch of conflict.
From your job, what advice would you give anybody doing that job right now?
The advice
She's not the first. I mean, this has been a churning situation.
I think in any job you go out with what you know. You defend your boss. You do it factually. If, when possible, we do a lot of crisis communications, you know, try to avoid the drip, drip, drip of the same story continuing to come back. So if you can get all of this out right up front, do it. Sometimes you're not able to do that.
Amos Snead. Thank you. Always great to see you. Republicans and Democrats both avoiding disaster in the primaries in California last night on that mini Super Tuesday.
When we survey of their own Republican colleagues about priorities this year. Plus, I'll ask the newly minted New Jersey GOP Senate candidate just how he's planning to take on his opponent and battle Democratic Senator Bob Menendez. And President Trump grants clemency to a first-time drug offender after a plea from Kim Kardashian. And he's considering the same for others. We'll explain what that's about on the Daily Briefing.
Let's get to 2018 Super Tuesday, kind of a mini one. Primary results in 8 states from last night. Republicans and Democrats both avoided disaster in California, while Democratic women dominated in 2 House races in Iowa. And an Alabama Republican who disavowed President Trump back in 2016 was forced into a runoff after she failed to secure a majority of votes. Bring in now Power Panel, and there's a lot of power with these two. RNC spokesperson Kayleigh McEnany and DNC Vice Chair Michael Blake, a member of the New York State Assembly. Great to see you both. Michael, I'm going to go to you first because you say that this was a big night for women.
Phenomenal night. When you think about what happened on last night, it showed around the country the power and impact of us supporting women. When you think about how 70 black women ran for office in Alabama, the message that it sends there. When you think about in down ballot races, such as in California, where Buffy Wicks, who led in her primary results on last night. When you see in Iowa with Cindy and so many others, this is sending a message. And it's all across the country, you know, even in New Mexico with Deb Haaland, who, if and when elected, will become the first Native American congresswoman ever elected. It sends a message. We are the party that's standing up for women. Showing what's happening when you empower and support our women. And that's why when we talk about I will vote, women are showing they're going to vote and win.
I'm going to step in with the entire nation is in a moment for women. And it may be less about party and more about that conversation, Michael, that you and I have both acknowledged needs to happen about women and their rise. Kayleigh, you say that this was not a total win for Democrats. Why do you say that?
Not in the slightest. First, you know, I'd point out that we've doubled the number of women running for Congress in the GOP. We are the party of women. But second, I really want to point this out. This blue wave, so-called blue wave, is crashing. And the president sent out a really important tweet just a few hours ago. He said the fake news will not report on the number of voters who showed up last night. And that's true, because Michael probably doesn't want to talk about this, my friend Michael, that the 7 seats that they are targeting are districts where Hillary Clinton won, but a Republican holds the district. Well, in 6 of those 7 seats, Republican turnout exceeded Democratic turnout. The average exceeding of turnout was 10.6%. And every incumbent got more than 50% of the vote. We are strong. We are energized. We are coming back, and the blue wave is dissipating.
You know, Michael, Representative Issa of California was talking about how much money some of the Democrats were spending, one in particular, one of those women you talked about, and how difficult it has been in that state in particular. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's always amusing to me when Kayleigh, and thank you, my friend, for always making the commentary of saying the GOP is the party of women, yet they won't give back money that they have received from Steve Wynn and so many others. It's the reason why we had our 42nd state legislative flip last night in Missouri. You look at it in California, when we think about why we're so excited about that, the 7 seats that were just referenced,
Yes, resources are necessary to win elections. However, at the end of the day, why are people voting for Democrats across the country? Because they see we're fighting for opportunity for all, especially when it comes for empowering women and standing up for women, as opposed to what we're seeing on the Republican side in that aspect. You know, we can't ignore the facts. 42 state legislative flips in addition to other races that have been won. The reasons why we're winning is people seeing we're on their side.
Kayleigh, I want to give you last word.
Yeah, I would just say, you know, Democrats, you want to be the party of women. Well, your president, former President Clinton this week said he's the face of the Me Too movement. Wow. Good luck with that, because he is the reason the Me Too movement is happening, to rebel against men like him in the Democratic Party. We are the party of women. We're excited. We fight for unborn women. We fight for women to keep more.
She didn't interrupt you.
We fight for women to keep more of their tax dollars. We fight for women to gain access to the job market, 17-year low. We fight for women on all fronts.
All right, I'll bring you back.